Have you ever wondered why, no matter how many sacred places you visit, or how many prayers you repeat, something still feels incomplete? Perhaps the truth is not out there waiting to be discovered, but quietly resting inside you, beneath the noise of belief, beneath the layers of guilt and expectation. Religion has often pointed us upward, to a distant heaven, or outward, to divine intermediaries. But what if, all along, the divine you've been searching for has been silently breathing within your very being? Alan Watts once said that trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth. It's impossible because you are already what you're trying to find. The same applies to God. We chase the sacred as if it's hidden behind the stars, yet every breath, every heartbeat, is a pulse of that same infinite source. The tragedy is that organized religion rarely told us this. It taught us to look for light in temples and texts, while overlooking the temple that beats within our chest. Imagine, for a moment, that you stop searching, that instead of begging the heavens for signs, you begin to listen to the silence inside. You'd notice something profound, the very stillness that religion tried to describe, the peace it promised after death, is accessible here and now. But because we were told to seek and find, we forgot that the seeker and the sought are not two. The act of seeking has kept us from realizing that we are already home. Watts believed that the divine is not a separate being, but the totality of existence, the ocean expressing itself as the wave, the infinite pretending to be finite. And until we awaken to this realization, we remain trapped in the illusion of separation, a believer searching for what he already is. That's why so many feel spiritually starved. They've been feeding on symbols instead of tasting the essence. The truth religion never told you is simple, yet radical. God is not something to be found, but something to be remembered. Not a distant force waiting to be worshipped, but the consciousness experiencing itself through you. And once you see that, every moment, even the ordinary, the painful, the chaotic, becomes holy, because the divine was never elsewhere. It was always here, patiently waiting for you to look within. Most people spend their entire lives chasing after an image of God painted by others. They inherit beliefs the way they inherit last names, without questioning where they truly come from. From childhood, we're told who God is, what he wants, and what he hates. We learn that he rewards obedience and punishes doubt. Yet, Alan Watts often warned that such teachings create a dangerous illusion, the illusion of distance. Because the moment you see God as something apart from you, you begin to feel incomplete, anxious, and forever unworthy of a divine presence that, in truth, never left you. Watts compared this illusion to waves in the ocean. Each wave believes it must rise higher to reach the sea, unaware that it already is the sea in motion. Religion, for many, has become the practice of trying to reach what is already within reach. We pray for connection, but we are praying as the very thing we seek connection with. The truth is so simple that it slips through our fingers. The more we chase it, the more it hides. That's why enlightenment isn't about adding new beliefs, but about removing everything that keeps you from seeing what's always been here. The tragedy, as Watts said, is that institutions built around God have turned spirituality into performance. Rituals, confessions, moral ladders to climb. They forgot that the essence of the divine is not in doing, but in being. A flower doesn't struggle to bloom, it simply unfolds. In the same way, awakening happens not through striving, but through surrender. When you stop pretending to be separate from life, life reveals itself as sacred. That's when you begin to taste what religion tried, but failed, to describe. And yet, people fear this truth. They fear it because it takes away the comfort of certainty. If God is within, then no priest, no text, no sacred rule can stand as a bridge between you and the infinite. That means you must walk without a map, trusting not the words of others, but the quiet intelligence that moves through you. This is what's called the letting go. It's terrifying because it dissolves the self that wants control. But in that dissolution, something beautiful happens. You find peace, not as a reward, but as your natural state. Religion taught us to believe in God, but awakening asks us to see God, and that is far more dangerous. Because seeing doesn't depend on faith or permission. It's immediate. When you finally see, you realize that the divine was never an idea to defend, but the very consciousness through which all ideas arise. God is not out there watching you. God is the one watching through you. And the moment you understand that, the search ends, not in a church or a scripture, but in the silent recognition that you were never lost to begin with. Imagine standing before a mirror, and instead of your reflection, you see everything: the sky, the trees, the people, the stars. That mirror is consciousness itself, and you are one of its reflections. Alan Watts taught that every individual is an expression of a universe playing hide and seek with itself. The universe hides behind your eyes, pretending to be you. That's why when you look deeply enough, you don't find a separate self. You find the infinite pretending to be human. Religion never told you this because it depends on maintaining the illusion that you are small and powerless, that salvation is something to be earned rather than recognized. When Watts spoke of awakening, he didn't mean becoming someone holier or wiser. He meant remembering that there was never a separation between you and the cosmos, only the dream of separation. It's as if life has been a long masquerade, and enlightenment is the moment you remove the mask. Yet, most people fear taking it off because they've been told that without it, they're nothing. But Watts insisted, when you drop the illusion of who you think you are, you don't become nothing. You become everything. He often said that seeking God through religion is like using a flashlight to search for the sun. The more you try, the more you miss what's obvious. The light you're using is the same light you're trying to find. That's why surrender is not defeat, it's revelation. When you stop running, you notice that the thing you've been running after has been running as you the whole time. In that realization, prayer turns into presence. Worship turns into wonder. And life itself becomes the sacred ceremony religion tried to imitate. But here lies the paradox. The closer you come to this truth, the more fragile your old identity becomes. Everything you believed about good and evil, heaven and hell, sin and salvation begins to dissolve. For many, that feels like death. And in a way it is. The death of the false self that needed to be saved. Yet Watts would say that only when the false dies can the true be born. The self you thought you were was only a wave. What you really are is the ocean, vast, eternal, and undivided. So, what religion never told you is that God is not watching over you. God is watching as you. Every time you laugh, cry, or love, that is the divine expressing itself. Every breath, every heartbeat, every moment of silence is the voice of the infinite saying, I am here. Not in the sky, not in temples, but in the pulse of existence itself. You are not a creature seeking its creator. You are the creator awakening to its own creation. When Alan Watts spoke of the divine, he never referred to an external power ruling over creation. Instead, he described it as an energy, an intelligence that manifests as everything. The trees are not growing, he would say, they are treeing, just as the sun is shining. The earth is peopling. In other words, you are not a visitor in this universe. You are an activity of it. You are what the universe is doing right now, the same way a wave is what the ocean is doing in this precise moment. The separation between God and creation is only a story, a useful story for control, but one that hides the profound intimacy between existence and consciousness. And that's where religion often misses the essence. It builds walls around mystery and then sells keys to enter. It teaches that you must pass through mediators, follow doctrines, or achieve worthiness before touching the sacred. But Watts dismantled this illusion by showing that the very act of seeking keeps the seeker blind. The moment you stop trying to grasp God, you begin to feel God, because God was never meant to be understood intellectually. The divine can't be captured by belief. It can only be lived. There's an old saying that Watts loved. You cannot get wet by talking about water. Likewise, you cannot touch the divine by endlessly describing it. Religion, in its attempt to explain the sacred, has turned mystery into memorization. But real spirituality is not about knowledge, it's about awareness. It's about realizing that every thought, every breath, every sound around you is an expression of the infinite playing through form. When you sit quietly and simply observe, without trying to control or categorize, something extraordinary happens. The boundary between observer and observed begins to fade. You begin to feel unity, not as an idea, but as experience. Watts believed that the divine is not serious, not rigid, not solemn, but profoundly playful. He described existence as a cosmic dance where God forgets himself to experience himself as you, me, the wind, and the stars. This forgetting is what allows the dance to happen at all. Without it, there would be no curiosity, no love, no story to live. So when you forget who you are, when you feel lost, it's not a mistake. It's part of the rhythm. The loss of connection is the first step toward remembering that you were never disconnected in the first place. And perhaps that is the deepest secret. The divine never wanted obedience. It wanted participation. Life is not a test to be passed. It's a song to be sung. When you live with that awareness, everything becomes sacred again, even the ordinary. The laughter of a child, the wind through the trees, the silence between your thoughts, all of it is God in motion. And as Watts would say, once you realize this, you stop asking how to find God, because you finally see that you never stopped being Him. To live from this awareness, however, requires a great unlearning. We have been trained to think in opposites, good and evil, sacred and profane, heaven and earth. But these dualities are mental constructs, not truths. Watts reminded us that you can't have the up without the down, or the front without the back. They define each other. In the same way, you cannot know light without darkness, or love without loss. The divine is not limited to what we call holy. It is the totality, the sum of every contrast. God is the silence and the sound, the birth and the death. To see the divine in only one side of the spectrum is to see only half of the truth. Religion, in its fear of chaos, tried to sanitize God, to make him pure, moral, controllable. But in doing so, it stripped life of its raw beauty. Watts taught that the universe is not moral in the human sense. It is spontaneous. It does not punish or reward. It simply is. The rain falls on the sinner and the saint alike. When we stop dividing the world into good and evil from a limited point of view, we begin to see that everything, even suffering, has a sacred function. Pain exists not as punishment, but as contrast, helping consciousness recognize itself through experience. This understanding transforms how we live. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" we begin to ask, "What is life trying to show me through this?" The energy that we once called God is not judging us. It's expressing itself through every challenge, every emotion, every failure. The lesson is not in escaping the storm, but in realizing that you are the sky, untouched, infinite, and vast enough to hold it all. That's why Watts said that the meaning of life is just to be alive. It's so plain, so simple, and yet everyone rushes around as if it were necessary to achieve something beyond that. The moment you embrace this, fear begins to fade, because you realize that nothing can truly be lost. Not love, not time, not even life itself. The form changes, but the essence remains. Just as waves return to the sea, so do we. Every ending is a return to the beginning. Every loss is a disguised reunion. This realization brings not sadness, but serenity, the peace of knowing that you were never meant to hold on, only to flow. Watts would often laugh when asked how to find God, because the question itself misses the point. You can't find what was never lost. The divine doesn't need to be found, only recognized. And recognition happens not through striving, but through stillness. When you stop fighting what is, you begin to feel the rhythm of existence again. And in that rhythm, you discover the truth religion never told you. You and God were never two separate beings. You were one, playing both sides of the same divine game. Alan Watts often said that the greatest barrier to understanding God is the idea we have of God. The moment we turn the infinite into an image, we imprison it within the walls of our imagination. Religion, in its attempt to define the undefinable, carved the divine into shapes the mind could handle: a man on a throne, a distant ruler, a moral judge. But the truth is far too vast for symbols. The real God cannot be named, painted, or contained. The Tao that can be spoken, said Watts, is not the eternal Tao. The divine that can be described is no longer divine. It's a reflection, not the reality itself. And this misunderstanding has shaped humanity's suffering for centuries. By worshiping the finger pointing to the moon, we forgot a look at the moon itself. We traded direct experience for secondhand belief. Instead of listening to the still, wordless presence inside us, we memorized prayers written by others. Yet Watts urged us to see that truth is not in repetition, it's in realization. The divine doesn't live in memory. It lives in the immediacy of this moment, in the silent awareness behind your thoughts, in the breath that comes without command. When you begin to look within, you notice something extraordinary. There is no boundary between the one who observes and what is observed. The self you've been protecting, defining, and fearing to lose starts to dissolve. What remains is not emptiness, but fullness, a presence so alive that even silence vibrates. Watts called this the awakening from the dream of separateness. You realize that you were never a stranger in this world. You are the world, looking at itself from a particular angle, through a particular story. This realization doesn't make you special, it makes you simple. And that's where the beauty lies. Religion often promised grandeur, halos, heavens, eternal rewards. But the true encounter with the divine is humbling. It strips away the ego's need to be important. You don't feel like a saint. You feel like a leaf floating in the wind, free, unafraid, part of something vast beyond comprehension. And in that humility, there is joy, the kind that doesn't need reason, because it's not dependent on anything. The divine experience, as Watts described it, is not about escape, it's about presence. You don't ascend to heaven. You awaken to the heaven that's been here all along. Every moment becomes sacred. Every person becomes a mirror. Every breath a prayer. When you truly see God within, even the smallest acts, a smile, a glance, a moment of silence, become proof of eternity disguised as the ordinary. That is what religion never told you. The divine doesn't demand devotion. It invites awareness. Many resist this idea because it dismantles the very structure of their identity. If God is within, then the authority once held by religion, dogma, or hierarchy loses its grip. There is no higher being to please, no spiritual ladder to climb, no punishment awaiting those who fail to conform. Watts explained that this loss of external control terrifies people. They would rather be enslaved by certainty than liberated by mystery. And yet, true freedom begins only when you dare to question what you were taught to fear. This is why awakening is not comfortable. It shakes the foundation of your beliefs, your habits, and your sense of self. You start to see that the you you've always defended, your name, your history, your opinions, is not who you really are. It's a mask, a performance, a collection of memories pretending to be solid. When that illusion begins to crack, there's a moment of disorientation. The same way a caterpillar must dissolve before becoming a butterfly. You lose form before you gain freedom. Watts described this process as a kind of death, not physical, but psychological. The death of the separate self. The mind resists it because it feels like annihilation. But what actually dies is the illusion that you were ever apart from life. Once that veil falls, something magnificent unfolds. You begin to experience existence not as me against the world, but as the world expressing itself through me. You are not living life. Life is living as you. And with that realization, fear loses its power. Because fear can only exist when there is a sense of me that can be threatened. When that dissolves, even death loses its sting. Watts said that dying is like taking off a tight shoe. It's only uncomfortable if you believe you're the shoe. But when you understand you are the foot, the eternal consciousness wearing temporary forms, you no longer fear the end. You see it as part of the dance, a return to the rhythm of the infinite. What religion never told you, but what's made beautifully clear, is that you were never a visitor in God's creation. You are not an outsider begging for entry into heaven. You are the pulse of heaven itself, exploring its own depths through the illusion of individuality. Once you know this, every boundary collapses between sacred and profane, human and divine, birth and death. There's only one thing happening, forever: God, discovering himself through you. Alan Watts often emphasized that the moment of awakening is not a thunderous revelation, but a quiet recognition, the simple awareness that life has always been whole. You begin to see that there is never a broken part of you needing repair, never a lost soul needing rescue. What religion framed as sin was often just forgetfulness, the forgetting of your divine nature. And in remembering it, the burden of guilt begins to fade. You stop trying to earn what you already are. You stop apologizing for being human, because you realize that the divine expresses itself perfectly through imperfection. Every flaw, every failure, every wound is a brushstroke in the masterpiece of existence. Watts would say that the universe is not a problem to be solved, but a dance to be enjoyed. Yet for centuries, religion has taught us to mistrust joy, to see pleasure as dangerous, laughter as irreverent, curiosity as rebellion. But when you awaken to the divine within, you understand that joy is not the opposite of holiness. It is holiness. The universe didn't create laughter by accident. It didn't invent love, music, or sunlight as distractions. They are its language. Through them, the infinite communicates that existence itself is worthy of celebration. This realization changes how you see others, no longer as souls to be judged or converted, but as mirrors reflecting different faces of the same mystery. The stranger, the enemy, the lover, all are masks of the same divine actor. To harm another is to harm yourself. To forgive another is to set yourself free. Watts believed that compassion arises not from moral obligation, but from understanding. When you truly see that there is no other, kindness becomes as natural as breathing. From this place of awareness, life stops being a spiritual competition. There's no race to enlightenment, no scoreboard of virtue. Every person you meet is exactly where they need to be in their own unfolding. The flower doesn't rush the seed beside it to bloom faster. It simply blooms when its time arrives. Likewise, your journey toward awakening doesn't require effort, only attention. You don't force petals to open. You remove what blocks the light. And so, the irony is clear. The more you chase God, the farther you drift from the truth. Because the act of seeking implies absence, and there is never any absence. The divine doesn't wait for your arrival. It has been speaking through your heartbeat since the beginning. Watts said that once you truly see this, life stops being a search and becomes a surrender. Not the surrender of defeat, but the surrender of trust. The same trust the river has in its flow, the same trust the stars have in their burning. That is what it means to find God within, not through belief, but through being. As the illusion of separation fades, a profound peace begins to take its place. Not the peace that depends on silence or safety, but the peace that exists even in the storm. Alan Watts described this as the eternal now, the place beyond past and future where life truly happens. You realize that the present moment is not something to be reached. It is something you've never left. Time, as the mind measures it, collapses into presence. And in that presence, you encounter the divine, not as a concept, but as direct experience. Watts loved to remind his listeners that awakening doesn't change what you see, it changes how you see. The same world remains, but you perceive it differently. The tree no longer stands as an object outside of you. It breathes with you. The sky no longer feels distant. It unfolds within you. You don't see yourself as a person standing in the world, but as the world looking through a person. And with that realization, everything becomes sacred again. The mundane transforms into miracle. The ordinary reveals its infinite depth. This awareness doesn't make life easier, but it makes it meaningful. You still face challenges, heartbreaks, and uncertainty. But now you meet them with open hands instead of clenched fists. You no longer ask life to obey your expectations. You allow it to reveal its wisdom through experience. Watts often said that trying to control life is like grabbing water. The tighter you squeeze, the less you hold. But if you open your hands, the water flows freely. In the same way, when you stop trying to control reality, you begin to live in harmony with it. And here lies the gentle paradox. When you no longer need to find God, you find God everywhere, in laughter and in loss, in silence and in chaos, in the stranger passing by, and in the beating of your own heart. You stop waiting for divine intervention because you see that existence itself is the intervention, a miracle unfolding endlessly in plain sight. That's when spirituality ceases to be a path and becomes a presence, a way of being fully awake to the sacredness of now. Alan Watts often closed his talks with a sense of wonder rather than conclusion, because there is no end to understanding, only a deepening. Once you taste the truth that God has never been elsewhere, life becomes a constant rediscovery, a dance between knowing and mystery. And perhaps that's the greatest revelation of all, that the divine was never lost, never distant, never waiting in heaven. It was always here, looking through your eyes, breathing your breath, and whispering softly, "Welcome home." There comes a moment, somewhere between silence and breath, when you realize that the search is over, not because you've found something new, but because you've stopped running from what was always here. All the prayers, the rituals, the teachings, they were never leading you to another place. They were guiding you back to yourself. And that is where God has been waiting all along, not as an image or an authority, but as the quiet pulse behind your existence. The sacred is not hidden in temples of stone. It is hidden in your own awareness, waiting for you to notice that you are never apart from it. Alan Watts often said that awakening feels like laughter through tears, the recognition that you've been chasing your own shadow, and the shadow was dancing only because you were the light. That realization humbles you, but also frees you. You stop searching for meaning as if it were a treasure buried in time, and instead, you start living meaningfully. Not tomorrow, not after enlightenment, but now. Every step, every mistake, every act of love becomes part of the divine rhythm. And suddenly, you see that God was never a being to be worshipped, but an experience to be lived. The truth religion never told you was never meant to be shocking. It was meant to be liberating. You are not a servant in God's kingdom. You are the kingdom itself, dreaming of its own walls. You were never meant to bow forever in fear. You were meant to stand in wonder. Because once you awaken to the truth that the divine is not outside you, the weight of shame and striving dissolves. What remains is presence, the pure, undivided realization that everything, even this moment, is sacred beyond measure. So take a deep breath and let this truth settle in your heart. You are not becoming divine. You are remembering that you always were. You don't need to earn it, prove it, or defend it. Just live it. Live with awareness. Live with love. And life itself becomes your prayer. Every sunrise becomes your cathedral. Every heartbeat becomes a hymn. And as you begin to see the divine in all things, in joy, in loss, in silence, you discover that there is no path to God because you were never off it. You are it. If these words resonated with you, if, somewhere deep inside, they stirred that quiet recognition, let this be your moment of reflection. Share in the comments what part of this truth spoke most to you. Let others see their own light reflected in your words. And if you felt connected to this message, consider subscribing, not just to support this channel, but to continue this journey of awakening together. Because somewhere, right now, someone else is searching for what you've just remembered, and your presence might be the sign they've been waiting for.